Good evening. Kaya Mabulian Gornamayalgara. Welcome to you all. I pay my respects to the Nyunga Wajak people and all of you here. Welcome. My co-chair, the lovely Ms. Zanella. Mrs. Zanella?
Ms. to you.
Ms. to you. I always get it wrong. Well, it goes through the formalities of acknowledging everybody properly. So welcome to a very special evening as part of the National Reconciliation Week, our Reconciliation Memoirs. The Reconciliation Memoirs started in 2021 to provide an opportunity to capture the impact key leaders had contributed to leading the reconciliation movement in Western Australia and around the nation. Our first memoir featured Fred Chaney, Uncle Fred, who joins us this evening, capturing his life journey as he stepped down from the Reconciliation WA board. Then Uncle Richard Wally, Nyunga elder and knowledge holder as a leader in the Nyunga Nation, who also joins us this evening. Welcome, Richard. Last year we featured lifetime reconciliation warrior Carol Innes. And this year we are honouring the father of reconciliation, Patrick Dodson, who accepted our invitation. Thank you, Patrick. It's going to be a powerful evening hearing from a leader that has been at the coalface of the reconciliation movement. Through its highs and lows and the fight for Aboriginal rights, it's been a consistent and determined voice for all, and we owe him deep gratitude and appreciation. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hunter.
Thank you.
We are indeed about to hear something very powerful. But before we do, it is my honour and my privilege to acknowledge some special people who are with us this evening. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders and people who have joined us, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from other parts. You are the primary reason that we are here and for this story to be told this evening. And in particular, our guest, Patrick Dodson. Kaya and Wanju to all of you. I've had the absolute pleasure of spending some time with Patrick, and he's probably sick of having the fangirl follow him everywhere. I'd like to welcome His Excellency the Honourable Chris Dawson, AC, APM Governor of Western Australia, and his wife, Daryl and Dawson. Honourable Kate Chaney, Member for Curtin, it's lovely to have you here. The previous Federal Indigenous Affairs Minister, Ken Wyatt. Life members, Jim Morrison, Alan Carter, Gary Smith, Irina Catalini. Karen Mundine joins us, the CEO of Reconciliation Australia. I'd like to acknowledge my fellow Reconciliation WA board members, all Director Generals, past as well as present, because I have seen some past in the audience, mayors from local areas. Members, partners and friends of reconciliation, you are all welcome. I would also like to acknowledge our key partners for this particular event, the Reconciliation Memoirs Wesfarmers, who are our commissioning partner to produce the memoirs, and Woodside for supporting the presenting of the memoirs to you this evening. Wesfarmers this evening is represented by Naomi Flutter and Woodside by Sharon Reynolds. Thank you for your ongoing and continued support. We also thank NITV and SBS On Demand, who will be hosting the memoirs on demand. So this is an important conversation that we can provide a legacy for those to watch who have not been able to be here tonight. And so welcome to General Manager Jason Oakley. But now it is my utmost pleasure to introduce Auntie Robin Collard, Noongar elder, beautiful woman, and wonderful storyteller. Auntie Robin.
Kaya, Wanju, Nija Nunakan dat Nini, Janang Karijan, Ngan Kulturpan Nija, Bulabara, Wanju, Maman, Yogas, Ngunis, Chukan, Burias, Wanju, Wanju. It is truly an honour to have so many notable people here this evening, and for me, the privilege of delivering the welcome to country. Kora kora mort jenang, jenabidi, jenabidi, jena, 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 jena. Nunakandat ni kar jenang, nganing kep, bulabara, bulabara, bulabara. Ni, kulanga wa, ket jenang, ngai, wabening, duga, jibber-jobbling, murich. For many thousands of years, our ancestors have walked this land. They've left their footprints in the sand and in the water. We hear them through time, the echo of the beautiful sounds that they have left behind in their legacy for us. They sat around the campfire, sharing their food and water and telling the many stories together. And as the evening would wear on, the stories would get longer. But then we stop. We listen. We can hear the children playing, sometimes crying, the dirt and the dust flying, swimming in the water, playing. Nijanunga jeran jenang, kep jenang, murich. This is the Noongar season of Jeran, one of our very special 6 seasons, the time of reconciliation for us all. Ngalakan ken nija, ngalakan bula jenang, kura calling maya jenang, nija wajak, kwapadak, Noongar buja. We are one, and we are many. From all the lands on earth, people have left their homes and come here to make their home, to live, work and play in Wajak, Noongar, Buja. Babinga nija, jenabidi, jenang. Yaka, kulling, wa, jenang. We make many loyal friends on our journey as we live, work and play together. We be kind and we be respectful to one another because there is plenty for us to share on this land. But also that kindness and respect is of most importance. And earlier when I talked about all those Buddhias, all of the leaders that are here, it's also about acknowledging our Buddhias in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community because they are our leaders. They have left the legacy whose shoulders that we stand on so that we too can teach our language and all of the respect and kindness to our future children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Kalyakul, Yanka, the past impacts the present and the present impacts the future. Kalyakul, Yanka. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Robin, for that extremely beautiful welcome to country. It always comes with a wonderful tale, so I really acknowledge and thank you for always enlightening us with your beautiful stories. Can I also acknowledge you're on Wajak country, and I'm delighted to share the podium tonight with Karen Mundine, the CEO of Reconciliation Australia, as we form part of the Australian Reconciliation Network working together. My name is Jodie Nunn and I have the great privilege of leading the Reconciliation WA team, but I have to say that they do all the hard work. I often get the glory, but they do all the hard work and they're up the back tonight, so could you please join me in giving them a round of applause?
I'm not sure if I ever thought I would get the privilege of introducing the calibre of the gentleman that we have here this evening, but it's a real moment of a real highlight for me. We're going to have the most incredible yarn here this evening. Before I do, I'd like to acknowledge, of course, that it wouldn't be possible without our partners, Wesfarmers and Woodside, and I really do acknowledge the genuine partnership they offer in offering up these wonderful opportunities to share powerful stories. I do apologise, my voice is nearly crackling at the end of this week. It's just holding on for dear life. The Memoirs really has become a powerful collection of leaders who have really supported the reconciliation movement over many years. And to say we were delighted when Patrick Dodson said, yes, I'll do it, is an understatement. This series would never have felt complete without the father of reconciliation sharing his words with us. But I do have to pay a very special tribute to Fred Chaney, who I know put in a very good word for us, and without Fred's gentle and courageous support, I don't think Patrick would be here this evening. So a genuine thanks to you, Fred, for your ongoing support. So here we are. I'd also like to welcome the superb writing of the Memoirs for the fourth year, Victoria Laurie, who has joined us this evening, and of course Stephen Castledine for his beautiful design over all four. We're nearly at a box set, ladies and gentlemen, so we're looking forward to the fifth next year. Vicky, every year you bring the Memoirs to life, and every year she says to me, I don't mind if someone else writes it, and every year I say, no, Vicky, you're writing it. So thank you again, Vicky, for your beautiful words. But tonight it is really an honour to share Patrick's memoir, and the yarn will be facilitated by none other than Ken Wyatt. It's not lost on me that this is a reconciliation moment in its own right, with opposing sides of politics coming together. And when I had the real blessing of hearing them in the pre-brief to tonight's event, they absolutely acknowledged that sometimes they viewed the world from different perspectives of politics, but they spoke about their deep love and their shared love for their people and their hope for generational change. It's our pleasure and it's my pleasure to acknowledge and welcome Ken tonight, Ken Wyatt AM. He's a Noongar Yamatji man and a former Australian politician. He was a member of the House of Representatives from 2010 to 2022, representing the division of Hasluck for the Liberal Party. He is the first Indigenous Australian elected to the House of Representatives and the first to serve as a government minister and the first appointed to Cabinet. There's lots of firsts there. Tonight, Ken will join Patrick to explore his memoir. So thank you, Ken, so much. And as I said, it's a delight to be here with my colleague Karen Mundine, CEO of Reconciliation Australia, a Bundjalung woman, and so a warm welcome to Boorloo, Karen. It's a frantic week for Karen. I think she sees and touches down in every city across the week, so we thank her really genuinely for making the trip west. Wanju, Karen, and I'll leave you to introduce Patrick.
Well, Kaya, and in my language, Jingawala, thank you, Jodie, for this extraordinarily and kind invitation. I always feel very welcomed when I come to this country, to Boorloo, and so thank you for that exceptional welcome. I pay my respects to the Whadjuk Noongar, to the ancestors of the past and the elders of today. I thank them for their guardianship of this country and continuing to push their culture forward and bring it to a wider audience in the broader Australia. As a visitor here, I walk softly on this place, and I thank you for the invitations. It is an absolute honour to introduce Patrick Dodson tonight. A Yawuru man, an activist, a politician and a senator for this state of Western Australia, a towering intellect and a giant in Australian public life for decades. His contribution to reconciliation and the fight for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' rights cannot be overstated. They are synonymous. And while he might chafe at the title of Father of Reconciliation, at least in its formal process, he absolutely is in this country. Now, I was a teenager the first time that I met Patrick. He was a father of a different kind back then. And I have been inspired by him ever since. Later on, working for the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation under his chairmanship, I learnt a thing or two, including how to deliver a speech or a sermon with gravitas, and as he was oft quoted as saying, how to feed the chooks. But my greatest learnings, and in fact my biggest responsibility is in my current role, is how to deliver against the aspirations and the legacy of reconciliation that was built by this man. He doesn't know this, but I regularly consider every day, what would Patrick do? So I am very much looking forward to this conversation, two giants in their own rights, and a conversation that I'm sure will enlighten us in many different ways. Now, I understand that we're going to go for about 75 minutes, is that correct? And then we'll open up for some questions at the end. So please join me in warmly welcoming Patrick Dodson and Ken Wyatt.
Patrick, it's great to be on the stage here with you, but I want to go back to something Auntie Robin said. She said, the past impacts on the present. If you were to reflect on that in terms of the past for you, then what was that, and how did it shape your thinking and the direction that you took after in later life?
Well, probably a feature a lot of people don't know, that I was a very stubborn person as a child. And for that stubbornness, I often got corrected, of course, by my parents. But I think what impressed me was the strength. We had a group of young fellows that used to work together, fish together, hunt together, ride horses and all of those things. So the significance of friendship was what struck me. But that was interrupted also by the significance of authority, and that was the welfare, the native welfare, and unfortunately the police, who were the instruments of power and authority that could remove you. And I saw kids chased by the police and taken away. They were taken away to Croker Island up in the top end from Catherine. But we weren't rich, we were poor, but we also were rich in many ways. What I remember is laying out on a canvas outside the house at night and telling stories and looking up in the sky and all of those things, and our mother telling us stories. And I'll finish on this, Ken, because I know we've got to keep moving, otherwise we'll never get out of my childhood. Remember the Russians sent a dog up into space, the Sputnik or something, and we used to always feel sorry for this dog. We never knew what happened to him.
Well, he came back, and there's now a cafe in near the Eagles headquarters named after that dog.
Sputnik. So I named my dog. I had a dog as a kid named it Sputnik too.
Now, the other point that came up during that opening was feeding the chickens. How do you feed the chickens? I was thinking of Karen's comment. How to feed the chooks.
Well, it's a term I used to hear Bjelke Peterson use, the Premier of Queensland.
So you liked pumpkin scones, did you?
No. I never had the benefit of Flo's scones, but I used to hear Bjelke Peterson saying he was feeding the chooks, and I always wondered what that meant. And then I'd see him in front of a press pack and talking to them and instructing them on what the values of life were. So I thought, well, this is what you do in life.
It's not a bad analogy either, because I just want to, on truth-telling and justice, you have been very strong on that over many years. And in all the time I've known you, you've spoken about this. And I just want to say, There's some words you uttered which I like, and I just want you to talk about them. Without truth, there can be no justice. Without justice, there can be no reconciliation.
Well, I suppose I learnt that very early because we had some wonderful headmasters at the Catherine Primary School where I went to as a young boy, who stood up to people who said these Aboriginal kids shouldn't be allowed to come to the picnics or the dues at the school because we couldn't make a contribution. We didn't have enough to bake a cake to bring to the school, and we didn't have shoes. But extraordinary people stood up against the trend, and it wasn't easy for some of those people, the small towns and bigotry and racism and ignorance. But the truth of the value of young kids, young people, irrespective of who you were, whether you're an Aboriginal kid or whether you're Chinese or a white kid, it didn't matter. It was the truth of the importance of the education access and the value of every kid getting access to what the benefits were. And that without that, you can't find a good basis for your relationship, and therefore you can't get to reconcile. You'll constantly be at odds with each other. So I learnt very early that when you were caught out, you'd best tell the truth rather than try and lie your way out because you'd get caught.
And the punishment was even greater when you were caught out.
The punishment was even greater, yes, it was.
Pat, you went to school, you spent some time in the Northern Territory, and then you went down to Victoria, or in the southern states.
Yes, in the southern states. I mean, my parents had died, and we became the property, basically, of the native welfare system under Mr. Geezy in the Northern Territory. And some people here would remember Geezy, some wouldn't. And we were destined to be sent across to Garden Point, where the Stolen Generation kids were all taken. But I had a pretty feisty elder sister who knew about these bureaucracies and governments taking kids away and they never come back. So she fought the system because, as I said, my parents had died. And then it was a question of what to do when I got to an age of leaving school, because I had three other younger brothers and sisters, and the aim was for me to get to the age of leaving school, then go to work and help my sister get these other kids back and reunited. That was the aim. When it came to me wanting to leave school and go and work in the cattle stations, she wouldn't hear of it. So I was then sent down to Victoria because the religious in the Northern Territory, the Catholic priest up there, was a fellow from Sale or somewhere. He said, "Oh, there's a new college that's just been opened down in Hamilton. Send him there," because I had no desire to go to Queensland to the Christian Brothers over there. Not that I've got anything against the Christian Brothers, but I thought, if you're going to send me away, send me as far as possible because I'll walk home.
So how did you adjust to the cold?
I didn't. And I still haven't. But, and I've made a vow to myself I'll never go and live in the south. Well, once I get out of there, every place I've studied was always cold, like Douglas Park and Canberra and Melbourne. They're all cold places. So, and when I went, I was about 7 stone, I think it was, and back in those days, I don't know what that is in kilos. But they said to me they're going to have to feed me up because that's the only way I'm going to survive the cold. And so they did, but I had to get used to knives and forks and distinguishing mutton from beef because I only knew beef, I never knew mutton, and how to use the order of the layout on table. So there's a whole range of things I had to learn from a social point of view. We had one plate and a spoon if we were lucky at home. But it was an all-boys school. It was a boarding place. And they can be tough places, as you know, but I got on well with most of those Western District young fellows who are now, got their own families and got their own farms, and some of them have passed on. But a great experience, basically, at the college. And I developed a thirst to learn because I'd been given the opportunity. It was in the early days of the assimilation policy that I didn't know of, but the mantra, I think, was education was the key. And to me, education was how to deal with the whitefellas and their systems, and to be able to advocate, or how to put the arguments of our people to the authorities, because every meeting I ever listened to as a young kid was people were talked down to and they were talked over, and they had no idea about what the motivations were of the people who were engaging with them. So I thought education is an important matter, to learn English, understand what's behind it, and then understand all the systems and functions so that I could be of some use when I got out of the place.
But there's also an event while you were down there that changed your view. And in the book I read, where you talk about there are some good white fellas. What was that event?
Well, there are many good white fellas, but in that particular event, because we were still under the I was still under the Native Welfare Protector of the Northern Territory, and they used to have a person who'd come up from Melbourne to check on how we were progressing, and if we weren't academically inclined or making good progress, and they'd send us back to go and work on the farm or somewhere. But one of the things this fellow asked in the questionnaire was, are there sheets on the bed when you go out to stay with these people? And I'd only ever gone to one family, basically, when I was down. I couldn't go back to the territory. So I went home, or when I got the next holidays, I took the form home to Mrs. Gartland, her name was, and she'd been a matron of the hospitals. So she was a bit taken aback when this question was, are there sheets on the bed? And she said, well, tell me when they're coming, when the functionaries turn up. And he did turn up, and I rang and say he was coming, and I never saw him after she'd had an encounter with him.
But I get the sense that she was very strong in her support for you and very fair in wanting to see you succeed.
She was a very, and so was that family. They treated me as an extended part of the family. There was no pretense about that. If I was doing the wrong thing, I'd be told, and on the other hand, if I was doing the right thing and I worked hard, I was paid for working on the farm. I was telling Ken before that one of the things that happened on the farm was that Malcolm Fraser used to have a property just down the road from where the Gartlands had their place, and one of his bulls got into old Jack Gartland's paddock, and I told him, and he said, well, leave it there for a while. and then after a month I went back and I said, Jack, that bull's still there. He said, oh, you better get it out and take it down the race and put it back in Malcolm's paddock. So that was a joy, and I didn't see Mr. Fraser at the time, and I probably didn't know much about him, but his bull was of great service to Jack.
So, Pat, when you finished there, where was your next journey to?
Well, I had to toss and turn a bit, because when you come to the end of a secondary school, I think the referendum had just been run in '67. What are you going to do with all of this opportunity you've got, and how can you be of value, really? And I tossed and turned about that for a good while, many different things I had in mind. But I eventually decided I'd go and join the Catholic priesthood and join a religious order, the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart. And because they were the only order that were operating up in the Northern Territory, and that's the only way I could get back up into that way and back to the north. Most of these other people worked in different places. Most other orders or societies worked in other places. So then I spent 6 or 7 years in different places studying, and ultimately ordained up in Broome in the 70s. And that was a grand occasion, and a lot of people came, and it was a great event. But it was a time when the church itself was going through a bit of a renewal period.
You weren't the cause of it, were you?
Eh?
You weren't the cause of it?
Yeah.
The renewal?
I'd like to think I was the cause, but no, I wasn't. John the 23rd, I think, decided that the church needed to be a bit updated on its practices, and a lot of other things needed to be changed. But it was it was a time, and one of the key events in my life was I was sent, and I call it the missing link, between the Eucharistic Congress in Melbourne to Philadelphia. And as a consequence of going, I went out to the Dominican Republic and got to see a different model of church, basically, where the French-Canadian order was virtually on the brink of being kicked out by the regime. And so they had to develop a different model to survive. And I could never see why Australia couldn't adapt to those sorts of models within the missionary areas anyway, and in the communities and so forth. So there were some benefits in seeing other models, but also some downside, because it was such a conservative place, and the church is such a conservative place. You start trying to talk about liberation theology at the pulpit in Darwin, it doesn't go down well.
Actually, I once had aspirations of becoming a priest too, so you and I could have been serving in the same diocese somewhere had that happened.
That's right. We might have been able to celebrate together.
You could have ended up being Pope.
Oh, no, I don't think so. No. Once you put people in peaked hats, they get them to be trouble.
Pat, you went from there and you were heavily involved in the land rights movement in the Territory. You had an association with Wave Hill. And you were a powerhouse in the way in which you influenced not only governments but our own people in some of the modelling and the directions we should take. Do you want to share that with us?
Well, as a young, I suppose, adult, or young, I was still at school, so a young man, I was horrified by what I witnessed in Katherine when the Gurindji people walked off the pastoralists at the Wave Hill, and they'd organised this meeting, which was actually billed as a rights for whites, and it was like the Ku Klux Klan, basically. It was a terrifying event because it was in the Katherine Town Hall, Aboriginal people all outside, and inside were these bussed-in people from I don't know where, Adelaide or somewhere, and these rants against Aboriginal people. And they had one or two Aboriginal people there to, support them basically on their condemnation of these people who wouldn't go back to work. And this, as you know, led to the equal wages case in the Northern Territory and the peacocking of the best workers for a 3-year period. But it was a time when that whole breaking of the mould, I think, is starting to take place. And therefore, the impact of the Gurindji and that movement and the struggle that I later learned about in the political space, when I think the people from the National Party and others had to grapple with the concept of how can we recognise a title to land, whether it's a lease, a licence, or what is it, how do these natives get to be landowners? And it was clear that that struggle for recognition of the rights of people to their land was part of a bigger struggle, obviously, but an important struggle. And when Whitlam went to Gurindji and poured sand into Vincent's hand, and both of them basically saying, let's walk together as mates and friends. Now that's got lost on everyone, because we still got back to this sort of who owns what and how can I do what I want to do on this without you interfering with it. So the legislation that Whitlam brought in was a pretty important intervention in our nation, because the notion of land being held by Aboriginal people wasn't fully acceptable or understood. It was preceded, as you know, by the Nabalco case. And when that case basically said, well, we can't deal with this question of sovereignty, this question of how do Aboriginal people own land, then they came up with the notion, well, we'll create, after an inquiry, we'll come up with a piece of legislation. And the Northern Territory Land Rights Act was a very important piece of legislation, and Malcolm Fraser, of course, as you know, enacted it when Gough got turfed out. And it's been a very, very important benchmark, I think, to the basis of our relationship in this country.
Is there anything that you would change in terms of the journey that you took? Because you were an influential figure in some of those discussions, and I know at times it burnt you out.
What I would change, I think I would change, was when the Mabo judgment came down, there was a group of people with diverse political views who tried to find common ground outside of the public gaze. And we teamed up, irrespective of our views, Aboriginal people and people in very important positions in other industries or political persuasions. And we tried to get the government to understand that there's a better way to do this than simply do the minimalist position, and that we can find ways to better accommodate what the court had indicated to us, and that it wasn't about stealing people's backyards, it wasn't about someone getting a better advantage, etc. So what impressed me was the capacity of people of diverse political persuasions trying to find the common ground between them, and then bringing that back to the politicians and others and saying, and industry groups. Me and a very prominent member of the National Party at one stage went to see the Australian Mining Industry Council, and they threw us out both together. And I said to him outside, I said, listen, brother, now you know what it's like to be a native.
He would have smiled at that too. So Pat, that would have taken you on a very interesting journey that played out very importantly in the native title legislation. I remember that conversation you and I had with Noel outside Malcolm's office, and it brought home to me the divergent views that would have prevailed. How did you work to get that compromise that saw the legislation eventually go through?
Well, it's hard, and you've got to respect the institutions of this country. We mightn't like them, but we've got to respect them. And I think whether whether your side of the fence or my side of the fence with the Prime Minister, you still got to respect them because of that office. And you should never deal with people in a disrespectful manner. Not only those people in high office, but even the person on the street. And it's not a constructive thing when you attack one of the leaders in a very unbecoming way. And I think what you've got to try to do is get them to one side and have a discussion and say, listen, this is not the way to behave, but I'm not telling you what to do. But you've got to learn to behave in a way that that person is actually going to listen to you and try and find some common ground with you and have some empathy with your position. And if you don't do that, all you're going to do is continue to drive wedges. And that's the easiest thing to do, is to put wedges down and keep, splittering the division, creating a bigger division in the discussion on complex issues. Native title was a real challenge to find common ground. I was the chair of the Reconciliation Council. We tried to bring, and we did bring, all the different factions, the land councils, the pastoralists, Chamber of Commerce's, Aboriginal leadership, to get them in the one room so that they could listen to each other and see where they could find common ground. And it was interesting because everyone's preoccupied with their own interest. The Aboriginal people are preoccupied with their interest, the miners, the farmers, whoever they are, all preoccupied. And we had a session at one stage where there was everyone was in the room, this diversity, and it became clear that when Aboriginal people talk about land and country and family and community, they're uppermost. You get in a room with corporates and others, and they're talking about market share and return on investment and how much capital they got under their belt and where they might likely to go in terms of returns to their investors. It's a mile away. And you've got to try and say, well, okay, you two blokes look like you're the same age. You both grandfathers or not? Have you got grandkids? Yeah, okay, well, how do you deal with your grandkids? Well, we talk to them. Do you talk to your kids? Yeah, you talk. Yeah, okay. Well, you've got something in common here. You talk to kids. So, but can you start to do something from there to find some common ground around bigger issues? You know, it's not as hard as it seems, because you can talk to kids and he can talk to kids. So it's and once people find that they're able to deal with the difference and diversity and their natural inclination to stand back from the issue, then they can work on how to build what it is that they've got in common. And that's been the philosophy that I've tried to imbue within the reconciliation movement over my time. But it wasn't me alone. There was the late Rick Farley, who was an advocate for the National Farmers Federation. He was very, very strong on that. And he and I went to Fitzroy Crossing at one stage and had a meeting of the cattlemen up there, and Aboriginal cattlemen and non-Aboriginal cattlemen. We actually got them into the one room at the Fitzroy pub. And for about the first 2 hours, it was all, you know, your dogs do this and you don't shut the gates and you do all of this, you light fires and blah, blah, blah. To the extent where we said to them, well, listen, we know all that. Tell us what you've got in common. And they weren't focused on that, of course, until Farley said, do you think you've got the industry in common? I said, oh, yeah, we're all cattlemen here, we're cowboys, we ride horses, we chase bullocks around and put them on trucks. So they found that the industry was their common base, and from there they could talk about what they could do to work with each other to enhance their industry. So it wasn't a heavy, support the Declaration on Indigenous People's Rights, but it was, what have you got in common here in the industry? So how can we work to enhance the industry? How can we get better breeding lines? How can we get access to the markets, etc., etc.? So finding a common base was very important, and those blokes walked out of there less inclined to argue about whether the dogs were chasing their cattle or whatever it was. They knew that was a fact of life, but they could deal with that then. They realised that there wasn't a deliberative strategy about that, but they both needed to be effective in getting their industry to be more rewarding, I suppose, and getting greater returns for whatever they were doing as cattle people. So if people spend more time doing that, rather than, well, why I can't get on with you, then we'd go a long way.
We would. Pat, I want to turn to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. I was in health at the time. I'd had representation from a number of people to help out as a public servant, and then the announcement was made we'd have a Royal Commission, and then your name floated through the media airwaves. And normally it's lawyers, but you were the first non-lawyer in that group. How did that occur, and who approached you?
Well, it's interesting, and I'm proudly a non-lawyer. But not that I don't value lawyers, but I don't think everyone in this world has to be a lawyer. But it came about because the Premier at the time, Mr. Dowding, and the head of the Commission, Elliot Johnson, I think saw the merit in not just rerunning the coronial inquiries, what happened to this person when they were taken into custody and blah, all the things that you need to investigate. They saw the merit in saying, well, what gives rise to this? Why are people coming to the attention of the police in the numbers and then taken into custody and then through the courts into detention? So what are the underlying factors? And you don't need a lawyer to tell you that. So they thought, well, given the number of, this is an inquiry into Aboriginal peoples, Western Australia needed another commissioner. They had enough going on with some of the things that were happening in the place in terms of the actual deaths and who had died and those sorts of things. And the commission had started, as you know, from Roban with John Patt's death, basically. So they agreed that, and I was leaving the Central Land Council at the time to go back to the Kimberley to work, hopefully with my own people for once instead of everyone else's people. But that wasn't to be, and so Elliot Johnson approached me about whether I'd be interested in trying to work with the commission or become one of the commissioners to look at the underlying issues, and that interested me because I thought, well, if we can get our heads around why are they brought to the attention of the police in the first place, and then why does the system treat them in such a way, then we might be able to find some ways of keeping, certainly reducing deaths, but keeping people out of custody.
So, Pat, how was the interaction with the police? Because part of your work required you to look at lockups, talk to local police. Was there any suspicion?
A lot of suspicion.
Not for the wrong reasons.
But there was, because I was dealing with the underlying issues, and I'm a non-lawyer, so I don't know all the protocols and sensitivities of how you're supposed to deal with some of these institutions, like police forces or unions or politicians even sometimes. So I embarked on a process which I said, we'll go to all the major towns, we'll set up a meeting where the inquiry can take place, we'll invite the taxi driver, the people down the street, we will invite the institutions and the police and schools and whoever else to come along and give their view on why they think Aboriginal people are being taken into custody at the rates that they are. And of course, part of that was to go and visit the police in their stations, police stations, and to look at the lockups. And I got a fair way down the track doing that, and I think the police union thought I was out there running a land rights campaign or something. So they summoned me to Perth, and I came to see them and explained that I had a piece of paper from the governor appointing me to look at deaths in custody, not the underlying issues. So from then on, I think the realities of the job that the police have got in general, the police see people at their worst profile, their worst position. They're either drunk, abusive, misbehaving, threatening, whatever. And the police are there to, and they interface with that, you know. Whereas the prison officers, they're not, this is generalising, generally see people when they're sober, when they're more reflective, when they've got time to reflect on their behaviour and they're in a different sort of low space. And then generally in these small places, the police are there after 4:21. Most of the public servants are gone home. Not always, but most of them are gone home. And so the policeman's the only person in the public authority that's around. And so they're left to pick up the pieces, basically. So I saw a lot of work, and then I've seen some police in it being innovative and not being supported by their own forces. You know, I remember meeting a guy who had to buy paint so that this Aboriginal guy in custody could actually paint the cells, and I think he might have gotten into strife for that, but he took the initiative. But there was some positives, and the police are their worst advocates because they're there to enforce the law. They're not one way or another. They're there to enforce the law, and they're going to deal with people who break the law. And unfortunately, you know, there's an over-representation of Aboriginal people that are being picked up, and we've got to deal with that. That's still the underlying issues, and we've got to find ways to certainly deal with the over-representation of Aboriginal people with incarceration, with young kids, particularly young kids, but also when you look at the other systems, like the kids in out-of-home care, because these are Aboriginal kids as well, who, for one reason, the social dysfunctionality of our communities are such that all of these kids are at risk of being taken away to institutions. So it's a serious problem, and in a process of reconciliation, we've got to deal with it.
Just in a nutshell, what did you see as the outcome of the Royal Commission when you finished and you were able to walk out that door, watch governments interact with the recommendations, and then you could look back and think, that's a great moment or that's a great decision?
Well,
other than the Council for Reconciliation?
Oh, yeah, well, we spent a month under Elliott's direction, the Chief Commissioner, the head of the Commission, in Adelaide, assisting in the national right of the report and crafting the recommendations. And in the background was the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, the national representative body for the Aboriginal people of this country. And so we're half hoping that the interplay between that entity, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, and the governments would pick up the recommendations and collectively work towards their implementations, and that the ATSIC Commission would play a supervisory role over how governments played their part. And certainly there are recommendations about setting up justice committees that were there to set up so that you could discuss matters before they became crises in a local community. Now, a lot of these things have fallen away, but the essence of them is still there. And without an Aboriginal oversighting body, it's left to the governments, their political interest, which is pretty marginal in the context of all the other big things that they've got to do. And that's the problem. That's the problem, is it's not a priority. It only becomes a priority when there's, we're back to almost crisis point now, where deaths are occurring and people's judgments are being skewed, and the realities need to be exposed yet again. And that's not necessarily because of the behaviour of one group or another. It's a complex area.
Patrick, I want to take you to when you walked off the stage at Corroboree. The most powerful image I saw was you turn around after giving an incredible speech, and they flashed on the screen a road, a red dirt road with the gum trees on either side, and it looked warm. And you walked off the stage towards that imagery, and I thought, I wonder how Pat now feels given the journey he commenced, because I want to leave that with you and then take you to Bob Hawke's office when you went in to meet him at the beginning of this process. Because you didn't want the job.
No, well, remember, Hawke went to Barunga and promised the people the treaty at Barunga. And then he went back to Canberra and they bellowed him up and said, you're not going to have that. And we'll oppose it at every point. And out of that, he came to the view, well, we need 10 years of education so that by the time we hit the turn of the century, we might be in a position to have some document or documents of reconciliation which might set out how we can iterate on a better basis and deal with some of these substantive issues as well as the citizenship type issues, the lack of equity in services and things. And I thought, well, it's a hard task to educate Australians, and better people than me have tried. But with a council of people across the spectrum, there may be some opportunity, and we've got to try. We've got to try. It's got to be tried. And if you can bring people of difference together and get them to listen to each other, and for them then to go out and see that that's a positive encounter, a positive experience. Australia doesn't have an agreement-making culture with Aboriginal people. So we've got to find a basis for them to firstly understand each other and then be comfortable with each other and realise that the Aboriginal people are the first peoples of this country and they have rights. And we've signed up to it as a nation, of course, under the Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights. But we haven't implemented that in the... Some companies are very smart and are doing that with people. And that's the other point about it. I'll probably go off the point here.
No, cover UNDRIP, because this is parallel with what you did. Because many of those articles within UNDRIP are as pertinent out of the reconciliation work you did as they are within the UN Charter.
But they were, and part of my activities were to go to Geneva in the early period of the development of those articles in that declaration, when there was a very strong, there was a sub-commission of the Human Rights Commission that was set up, chaired by the late Madame Diaz, who had been a resistance fighter from Crete, but very empathetic and a very good person. And we had to go and learn how to behave in an international context. We had no idea how to do that. And of course she helped us learn how to express ourselves in a more civilised way in an international context, which got us to the point where the declaration's, gone through the UN and it's been agreed. But it's the input of many, many First Peoples around the world, because the existing instruments were not being enjoyed, or the rights that they proclaimed to give to people were not being enjoyed by First Peoples. And First Peoples are rights as collectives, as groups of people. And of course, most of our democracy and polity is about individual rights and interests. So when you butt up people with collective rights and interests, it's a bit hard to find ways to go forward. But we have signed up to that declaration. It took us a bit of time. It's there, the mechanisms are clear, and some nation states are actually going down the path of implementing it. Canada, New Zealand, Norway and some others. So there's nothing to fear with it. It's just we have to get on with it. And then there are many good industry groups seeing that as best practice now to deal particularly with the concept of free, prior and informed consent. Seeing that how do we manage that with the other competing rights and interests, and have the discussion, find the common ground again and work back from there. It's not hard.
I'm not going to ask you who your opponents would have been in this, because I think I know the answer, but how did you get around those who just... Because you were part of an inquiry into UNDRIP. What level of opposition did you have during those hearings?
Oh, well, thankfully a lot of the people who submitted were on side, thankfully. But there are others who are fearful and of concern. But it's not an easy matter even in the Labor Party, let alone trying to get it through a parliament. But the disappointing thing was when members on a committee of parliament don't turn up to listen to the arguments that other people are putting. So when you come to write a report and make recommendations, they're just operating off an ideological position, not off an informed position that they've taken evidence upon. And that's a real disservice, because if you don't go out and listen to what the people are saying to you, and then there are diverse views, but that's why committees are set up in the parliament, is to listen to the diverse views, particularly select committees, to find out what the strength or weaknesses of the particular provisions you want to talk about, or what do people think about them. It's an obligation on any politician, if they're on a party, on a committee, to go and listen to those people. Now, one of the disappointing was some people on the other side of the fence were not turning up. And so when it come to the report, they did the party line and said, oh, we oppose this, we oppose this. That doesn't contribute to reconciliation.
No, it doesn't. And the work of reconciliation has seen substantial change in this country. So you did educate a lot of people. And the title of the father of reconciliation is recognition of that work that you did. What were the most glorious moments for you?
Glorious moments? I wouldn't be sitting here if they were glorious. But, I think where people have taken time to listen to the perspective of someone that you thought they should never have listened to. And I saw good evidence of that and good teachers I've had in relation to that with the late, Elliott, Commissioner Elliott Johnson, who would spend time listening to a person about their concerns when he had a whole lot of other things to be doing. And I went to him once and I said, listen, now you've got to come and do this. And he said, well, hang on, Patrick, I'm listening to this person. And he was big enough to absorb, I suppose, what those people were wanting to say, whether they were in pain or whether they had a proposition or they had a concern or they wanted to yell at him about something. But listening to people seriously and then taking on board what they've got to say and then trying to put in practice or make the changes that are necessary to fix up those things is critical. And I suppose part of my experience is trying to find solutions to problems, and they're not always going to be definitive conclusions, but they are helpful to get us to move forward, solutions to move forward, and not just compromises because one party wants to be the top dog.
So we go to this principle of pragmatism versus symbolism, but also the entrenched practices of the institutions. How do you reconcile that and find a way forward?
Well, it's simple to me because the First Peoples are unique peoples. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are the first peoples of this country, and they have unique rights. And if you start from that base, and then you say, well, we've got a constitution, we've got a high court system, well, all right, well, how do we accommodate the rights and interests of the First Peoples? They're just not a citizen. They're for a long time we weren't even flora and fauna, and then we became citizens after 61 or 67, even though some might have gone before that. But we want to be mates and friends together, as Vincent and Gough were talking about. And that's true, and we've got to work at that. But we've also got a matter of justice. It's a matter of fixing the injustice. I mean, you can't live with pride knowing that the legal lie of terra nullius was crafted to disinherit the Aboriginal peoples of this country. The High Court's told us that. The High Court's told us. That's not me, that's the High Court telling us. And we've got to fix that. It's not just the disgruntled Aboriginal people today. Even our High Court has told us that. And we've got to find ways to bring honour and pride to our nation. And that seems to me a worthy sort of cause for us to work at. And everyone can work at that. But you need the leaders, the political leaders, to get rid of the fear they have about it and assist us, the citizens, to go forward in a way that gives us pride and we're able to celebrate it rather than see it as always a matter of oppositional politics.
So how do we overcome this fear?
Well, we engage. We hold the government to account. We've had a terrible result in the referendum where there was one direction we went down in, but that's not the end of the process. I mean, reconciliation's bigger than one referendum. I think there's been a reshaping of the referendum agenda from the Uluru Statement of the Heart, where they talk about voice, treaty and truth. There are other ways to create a voice through legislation and other means. I had the privilege of working with Julian Lisser on a committee which had suggested that, we support the Langton-Kelmer approach, which done a lot of work on regional voices and put in train capacities for Aboriginal people at a regional level to grapple with the problems along with the agencies and others, grapple with those problems and find solutions and hold people to account not only for the public sector outlays but for their own behaviours and attitudes. We can do that. We've done it before. We've been through the ATSIC Regional Council system. Wouldn't be the same as that, but the Langton-Kelmer report is a very important report. We shouldn't just discard it, but the government ought to go back and have a look at that. But we also should take the cue from the leadership in some of the states. The Victorians are leading us in terms of a truth-telling commission. They're leading us in terms of setting up, an assembly of people to help engage with governments to achieve better outcomes, but not only in terms of the public sector, not just from the economic point of view, the fiscal point of view, but better quality of life situations and better relationships and better respect. So, if Victoria can do it, surely to goodness, a great state like ours in Western Australia, we should be capable of this. And at the federal level with the and I don't want to be necessarily political, but we can't hide the fact that there's been a resounding return of the Labor Party, and they'll possibly be there for a couple of terms. Now's the time to build the bridge, to get the ground ready, go down the track of a commission that can oversight and enhance what we're doing through the marvellous agreements that are often struck under the Native Title Act, recognise the significance of those people who have established their native title, either by way of consent or course. Remembering that native title, you've got to demonstrate you're here before the foundation of these colonies. So my people and the Noongar people have had agreements. We went through the court system, which we had to prove that we were here, our ancestors, before the founding of this colony. Now, that's going to matter. You can't just go through that process and say, oh, that's it, you want to have a wheat bix. It's significant, and it's of benefit to the nation and to the state. And sure, you've got to balance rights and interests with people, but the balance shouldn't always be swinging one way. So there's some integrity about honouring the law. And the law in a few instances have been pretty clear about how the First Peoples of this country should be treated, and we've got to get on and respect that.
So why is the Truth Commission so hard to establish? What's your vision for a Truth Commission if we had one in WA?
Well, it'll be made up of a composition of people, not just Aboriginal peoples. Made up of non-Aboriginal people and Aboriginal people and people who've migrated here in the last 50 years, come out of Rhodesia or wherever they've come from, South Africa. So it'll be a composition of and a bit of a replica of our demographic composition. And it's important that we hear the stories of that diversity. But we acknowledge that a significant story is going to come from the First Peoples, because they're at the forefront of all of this, and how they were treated and how they were subjected to policies have been taken away, and you know a lot about that. But not for the purpose of dwelling on that, but for learning, and then finding ways to give respect to all of us, so that we've faced up to it, we've heard the stories, we've crafted a new narrative, greater than the ships coming in the Swan River, or Captain Cook sailing around lost on the eastern seaboard. But we've created we can create a narrative by listening to the truth that helps heal, but also helps build, and gives us strength. When we consider ourselves an island, but we're in a complex global environment. We have our neighbours in the Pacific, we have neighbours to the north, we have a whole lot of giants that surround us. Sure, nationally we might think Aboriginal people are 3% of the population, but if we keep locking us up the way we've been locked up, we keep dying in custody, and we keep being deprived and maintained in a socio-economic position where poverty rules and all the disabilities flow from, that doesn't give us a great credibility status internationally, so we can fix it. We have to fix it now because we voted. It wasn't the British. We could blame the British for coming in and putting their flags, but we, the Australian people, voted at the recent referendum and said, no, we don't want any recognition, or the Aboriginal people to be recognised in the Australian Constitution. Now, that's fine, that's what they did, but it's not the end of the story. And it's not the end of reconciliation, because these matters of justice are still there and we're going to have to resolve them.
Pat, I'm coming to the view that the no vote has created a silver lining for reconciliation. Because some of the people I spoke with who voted no now regret that. Some are saying, we've got to find a better way, how can we walk with you? So I think the seeds of what you planted as the father of reconciliation have been very powerful in galvanising people. How do we build on that?
I think we keep the conversations going. You know, we keep conversations, we keep doing the practical things that bring people together, like this forum and other things. People are doing a lot of this in their own way. That's about relationship, and it's a very important thing. I remember a lady once, a non-Aboriginal lady, who was too frightened to walk into an Aboriginal medical service because she said she'd be thrown out of there. I said, no, they won't. They won't throw you out there. They want you to come in and have a look. And so I said, come, meet me in the morning, I'll take you down. So I met her in the morning in this little town, and we both went down, and I introduced myself, and because I didn't know the people, and I introduced the lady, and the young lass at the desk said, all right, come in and I'll explain what we do here. And off she went. And she came out and said, oh, they're just like us. Of course they're just like you. They have the same needs and the same problems and the same worries and the frustrations. But they are the Aboriginal peoples. They're the first peoples. And they have rights that we've got to recognise. And they should be able to enjoy those rights without having to try and justify themselves at every point. Now, the beauty of the reconciliation movement is that we've been able to get to a situation in some places where there's a sense of equality. There's a sense of welcome and of being appreciated for whom you are as an Aboriginal person, and there's a lot of respect. And I must refer to the Governor here, His Excellency, who was very gracious in having a reception last night for me. But you know, the fact that the Governor's here is an important matter. And I don't say this to big note myself, but it's an important matter, listening to this conversation. Now, if we got governors around Australia listening to these things, appearing in these sorts of forums, it's going to have to send a message to the people who rule the place. You know, if the Queen's representative is sitting in the room listening to us as Australians, himself an Australian citizen with those responsibilities, saying we are going to need some leadership, and it's going to take a lot of us of diverse backgrounds and positions. So every step is an important step. You know, Fred Hollow says every eye is an eye.
Yeah.
But every step is an important step here. And the smaller steps are just as important as the big steps. And that's all about building the better understanding, appreciation, the love between each other, the concern and compassion. Ultimately, it's about how we shape our institutions and our legal frameworks that gives respect to the First Peoples as much as it gives respect to the traditions that we've inherited from Britain.
Patrick, I'm going to shift to Duke Gorge. When you went there, you would have felt what that impact was. And I read that section in your book. And I love what you said about you and Warren Edge both being committed. You want to share that?
Well, Warren Edge was the chairman of the Joint House Committee. He was as horrified about what had happened because he saw this as destruction of Australian heritage. And I said, it is destruction of Australian heritage, Warren, but it's destruction of those people from that area, their particular Aboriginal heritage. And the two things go together here. And I said, we've got to go out to meet and sit down with those people and not do what every other committee does, is just, oh, we'll have submissions, we'll go and talk to them. But we've got to sit down there, go and visit that place, meet with those elders, meet with the company, but meet with those people. We have an obligation to meet the diversity, but we've got to go there. So we went to, and he agreed. And it wasn't easy for Warren, but Warren, he's an old piker bull. He knows how to do things when he wants to do. And we were able to go there and show respect to the people who'd had their sacred site decimated. And we went and we walked up the creek, we went and looked at the caves and saw the destruction that had been caused. We listened to the stories of the miners telling us what they could or couldn't do and didn't do. And when you put it together, the amount of return they got off from destroying that section of their lease was minimal compared to the destruction that they'd caused to these thousands of years old, cave and heritage of these people. There was a hair belt found there, and that which has the DNA of their ancestors, which links those people. And knowing that was there, anyway, the committee, you asked me an earlier question, where the disservice came was that members, and they might have had good reasons, and I don't condemn them for that, but some people who should have been on the committee weren't on the committee who didn't come. So they didn't experience, they didn't see those old people crying. They didn't see the destruction of that cave, and they didn't see the pollution that was going into the watercourse where the sacred snake dreaming was. And so when we come to the end of the report, we're writing dissenting reports. Well, fine. But come and pay respect to the people. And that's what Warren did. And to her credit, Rachel Seward was a senator then for the Greens. And we were able to work across the party lines, despite some of the reticence and some, within some of them on the other side that wouldn't come or didn't come. And then took the ideological position that they can't support these recommendations. It doesn't do the Australian people any great service when that happens.
No, it doesn't. And from that, your report was tabled. What was the response of government?
Well, I think it's still sitting there for recommendations. Chapter 3 of that report has some very pertinent things to say to jurisdictions. Because it sets out the values that ought to be incorporated in state laws or the standards that state laws ought to abide by. Certainly the federal enactment of a Heritage Act ought to inculcate those into legislation. And of course that's a bit of a challenge to the Labor Party at the moment because the heritage law is now sitting inside the environment law. Yeah. And that was part of the dilemma with the lawyers not knowing where to go. They walked into your office, I think, and you said, well, no, you're in the wrong office. You've got to go over to see the Environment Minister. And, this all is time and money and consequences. So, very sad. And back in the day, there was a standalone Aboriginal Heritage Act. And I was part of the help, or part of the people helping to craft that when Clive Holding was the minister. And we said it was important because Aboriginal heritage it stands alone. It's part of the Australian uniqueness, and it's got to be given pride of place in the way we develop and balance, the competing interests. But if we keep obliterating it and pushing it down and subjugating it to every other interest and destroying it, you're participating in getting rid of the evidentiary base of a people who belong here. And that's what we've got to take stock of. Now, sure, we need all the minerals and things we need in the world, but find balance and find sustainability and find ways. One of the craziest things I've seen was a cave. You might know this place as your role as a minister back in the day. But another cave up in the Pilbara, which is in the middle of a haul packer route and a train load route. And it's jammed in so the vibrations of these machines ultimately are going to impact the fragility of that structure. Now that's today. So you can't just deal with sites as, we'll just fence this little area off and then we'll run everything else around it that's going to destroy its significance. It's crazy. But, we will be more enriched. I mean, the welcome we got tonight, how great's that?
Yeah.
You know, the welcome we got tonight, someone speaking in their language, on their own country, talking from strength, you know. Australia's a rich country and we have a rich traditional heritage. We've got to respect it, you know. Otherwise take the kangaroo and nimmy off the coat of arms. Don't leave them there, take them off. Put a train and a wallpaper up there.
Patrick, in your book you refer to William Cooper as being a hero.
Well, he was, and he is, he still is. I was fortunate to go to school, as you pointed out, in Victoria. I'm not sure, I think Mr Cooper may have passed on by then, but certainly Sir Douglas Nicholls was still alive at that time. And I learnt of Mr Cooper. And as I got older and learnt more and understood the hard work that went into the Yorta Yorta people fighting for their unique position, and Mr Cooper's leadership and Ferguson and Patton and all these Pearl Gibbs and others at that 1938 Day of Mourning ceremony. And then to go to the Prime Minister of the day, Mr Lyons, and put a petition which he'd organised around Australia for people to sign up to get the Parliament when it didn't have the jurisdiction. It was prior to the 67 referendum, so there was no head of power for the Commonwealth government. It could have been, the lawyers in the room will tell you it had the power and could have done it. Well, fine, why didn't they do it then? But the Prime Minister of the day did not have the clarity of the 67 referendum before him. So he didn't do anything on Cooper's request. But Cooper also organised a march. I think it was to the German embassy or what it was in Melbourne, because of the way the Jews were being killed and slaughtered in Germany and other places. So he wasn't just about the Aboriginal people. He had an outlook on the human rights and value of other human beings. And he stood up for that. And he obviously suffered as a consequence of it by people, but also had a lot of disappointment about it. But a great human being and a great advocate upon whose shoulders we stand, you know, as leaders today. And the young people will stand on tomorrow. And they've got to recognise where we've come from.
Patrick, given those qualities you've just described of William Cooper and your own Linyan and the way you are as an individual, calm, except when someone angers you, you could...
Which isn't that often.
I know that. But what's equally important is you are a hero.
But I'm a hero.
Yes, you're a hero, because there are many people who look to leaders who make a difference, and they look to them for their, not only the words that they utter, but the guidance they give in the way of finding solutions. And I know in my time as Minister, a lot of people described you as a hero, somebody who's made a difference to kids in community, to communities, and to Australia.
Thank you. Right on, sir. Thank you. Thanks, mate.
Don't shake hands yet, I've got to put a hat on.
What?
I've got to do something.
I would just like to read the final 3 paragraphs of the book, which you're going to have the privilege of reading. And Vicky spent 4 wonderful days up in on Yarra country in Broome, trundling around with Pat and seeing his country. And on the last day, they visited the Broome Cemetery, which is where Pat's grandfather is resting in the dream time. So with your permission, Pat, I'd just like to read these. On our last day, we visit the Broome Cemetery and we seek out the grave of Paddy Jerwin, lying deep in the shade of a mahogany tree. He'd have loved it, observes Patrick. No air conditioning for this old bloke. He leans over and touches the headstone, a bronze plaque mounted on local Kimberley stone. Next to the image of a pearling lugger are the words, outstanding leader of the Yaru, and on the left, Paddy Jerwin's eloquent saying that comforted his grandson when he felt the world was against him and his people. Patrick slowly reads out the words. The sun rises, wind blows, grass grows, the tide comes and goes, but no one can ever take your land. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Right, mate. Thanks.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, it's hard, Pat. And thank you, Dale. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Jody.
All right, get over here.
Afterwards.